Today's show is sponsored by Vincero Watches, which is an American company building super premium wristwatches starting at only about $150. And they're giving you 15% off when you go to davidpakman.com/Vincero. I've put the link underneath this video. Today's show also sponsored by Blinkist, which is the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. That link is underneath the video as well. Yesterday, rising Republican star Daniel Cameron, who's the Attorney General of Kentucky, announced charges against officers involved in the fatal shooting by police of Black woman Breonna Taylor, and very few charges were outlined, and now protests and unrest are once again rising, and we're going to talk about all of it. As a reminder, the story here is of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor, who was killed in her own home when 3 Louisville, Kentucky police officers executed what's known as a no-knock warrant. We've talked about no-knock warrants many times before, and the serious concerns about the use of no-knock warrants, particularly related to drug crimes. This was related to a drug investigation. Daniel Cameron said, listen, officers did announce themselves as they executed the no-knock warrant. Of course, the big picture, the red alert, is that officers used this warrant to search Breonna Taylor's home for someone who did not live there. No drugs were found in the apartment. And what ultimately transpired is that Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, having no idea that it was law enforcement in their home, because remember, there were no drugs there, the person they were looking for wasn't there, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend started shooting in what he believed was self-defense from potentially an armed intruder, and Breonna Taylor ended up killed in the gunfight that ensued. Now, one other note before we outline the charges. Yesterday's announcement was about criminal charges. The civil piece was settled last week. The city settled the lawsuit against the 3 officers involved. The lawsuit was brought by Breonna Taylor's mother, and the city has agreed to pay Tamika Palmer $12 million, and they've agreed to enact police reforms. Now, in terms of the criminal charges, one of the 3 officers charged with wanton endangerment. Wanton endangerment. And that is not actually related to the death of Breonna Taylor. The wanton endangerment is because of the discharge of the officer's firearm inside of the apartment. It put neighbors at risk. That's the charge. 2 other officers who fired shots, not charged at all. So in essence, nobody was charged for the actual killing of Breonna Taylor. This has predictably led to significant unrest, and protests have started, and the protests continue to build. And it's quite possible that the next 24, 48, 72, 96 hours are going to see even more of it. Authorities saying that 2 officers were shot and wounded last night in Louisville. The interim Louisville police chief, Robert Schroeder, said that they have a suspect in custody, but did not release too many additional details. We saw demonstrations and marches in cities including New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Philadelphia, just massive crowds. We have video of the crowd in Brooklyn near the Barclays Center, my sort of old stomping grounds when I lived in Brooklyn. That crowd eventually walked over the Manhattan Bridge and connected with another protest in Manhattan, in Chinatown and in surrounding neighborhoods. And we are seeing these all over the country, in addition to unrest that did become more violent in Louisville, Kentucky, which is the epicenter of this case. And again, overwhelmingly peaceful protesters with some provocateurs, as you typically see. So there's a few different things here. Let's do the political first, maybe. Politically, I still think this is bad for Donald Trump. This unrest related to racially tinged events is not good for Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump and some of his supporters continue to say these protests are a preview of Joe Biden's America. There will be more of this if Joe Biden is president. I believe most Americans see this, and they see it as part of the failures of the Trump administration, part of the failure of the ideology that Donald Trump espouses on police use of force. And we're seeing it reflected in the polls. We don't really have to wonder, after coronavirus and the economy, the third most important issue right now is this. It's race relations and this unrest and law enforcement. And Donald Trump's approval on that issue is very, very low. So I reject the idea that this helps Donald Trump. More importantly is the issue of justice. We have a criminal legal system that is meant to protect officers. Now, you can debate to what degree should officers be protected. And I am the first to tell you that to some degree they should be protected, in the sense that being a police officer is a potentially more dangerous job than being an accountant or being a teacher or being a cashier. And so some degree of protection makes sense for officers. The degree to which the default is we err on the side of the benefit of the doubt for the officers, that is allowing justice to not be served. So, I've given you the list before. We need demilitarization of police. We need special prosecutors to investigate police. Implicit bias training, okay. Fixing the war on drugs, a bad actors database. It's a very long list, 10 or 12 items, which I've outlined. But the precedent that is potentially set here is horrifying. If you have ever been associated with anyone who is potentially a criminal, the police can, in certain states, issue a no-knock warrant, go into where you're living, and you can end up shot dead with essentially no repercussions. Defending your home is not a defense in many of these cases. And remember, there was a grand jury that looked at a case. We covered it, I think, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years ago at this point. There was a case of a woman who fired a warning shot to get her husband to, her husband was approaching her and was abusive. She fired a warning shot in the garage and it hit drywall. She was charged more seriously than these officers. Okay. That doesn't make sense. So the system is hugely failing us. We will see the degree to which unrest continues in the next few days. But this is, we've been covering this for a long time. There's nothing new here, but the way in which it is now playing a role in the presidential election is certainly something, the timing of which could have political influence. And again, I do not believe it will be good for Donald Trump. Okay, there is a disturbing new piece in The Atlantic by Barton Gellman called "The Election That Could Break America." This is red alert stuff. This is not a rehearsal. Okay, this piece explains the plan that the Trump campaign has put together to bypass election results if Donald Trump loses. They have a plan for how to subvert the election results if Joe Biden were to win. And if we merely ignore it, we're not going to be prepared. So this is really the stuff of nightmares. Now, I'm going to explain the idea to you. The idea is the following. Trump choosing electors in battleground states, regardless of who wins the state, so that they will vote for Donald Trump at the electors convention. Okay, this is based on what some call a technicality. Normally, the popular vote in a state determines which electors go to D.C. to cast their ballots. So if Joe Biden wins Michigan, pre-selected Democratic electors go to D.C. and they say Michigan pledges our electoral votes for Joe Biden. The idea here is even if Biden wins Michigan, some Republican strategists and lawyers are saying, even if Biden wins Michigan, Donald Trump could say there was fraud in Michigan. We are going to send the Republican electors to D.C. instead of the Democratic electors, even though supposedly Biden won Michigan, because I believe that there was fraud. That's the idea. Now, the immediate reaction from a normal person would be, how the hell do you justify it? And indeed, the justification is fraud. Their explanation would be, we believe there was voter fraud. We don't really believe Biden won Michigan, as an example. So because Trump actually won, Trump is going to select Republican electors to go to D.C. and represent Michigan. The Atlantic explains that, quote, Trump would ask state legislators to set aside the popular vote and exercise their power to choose a slate of electors directly. The longer Trump succeeds in keeping the vote count in doubt, the more pressure legislators will feel to act before the safe harbor deadline expires. A Trump campaign legal advisor spoke to The Atlantic for this story and said that the goal would be for state legislatures to say, we've been given this constitutional power. If they don't think the results of their state are accurate, or if they're willing to at least suspend disbelief in order to help Trump, they could say, we are overriding the elector choices and we're sending Republican electors to Washington, D.C. The chair of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, Lawrence Tabas, also spoke to The Atlantic and said, quote, I've mentioned it to them and I hope they're thinking about it too, referring to this strategy. They are looking at these strategies. This is just one idea. We've talked, the more pedestrian and obvious ideas are having an army of lawyers descend on states at midnight on November 3rd. Well, technically, it would be midnight November 4th at the end of Election Day. And the idea of the Red Mirage scenario would be because of early in-person voting by Trump voters, at midnight at the end of Election Day, Trump might have a slight lead in some states. However, if all the absentee ballots were to be counted, those leads might evaporate in favor of Joe Biden. The idea would be you have lawyers descend on states at midnight to say, stop counting absentee ballots, making different legal arguments in different states. So this is not a joke. They are prepared. I've said it before. If Trump loses, I do believe he will eventually leave. But here are ways he can try to claim he didn't actually lose, either by preventing votes from being counted, claiming he won, and sending in different electors. Trump's legal teams are laying the groundwork for all of these strategies now. We've read that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are also lawyering up, but are they going to be ready? And one of the difficulties is when you're playing offense, you only need to come up with one strategy the defense isn't prepared for and deploy it. When you're playing defense, you have to anticipate every strategy in order to be prepared for it. And that's why this is so dangerous. What if it's simply not definitive come Election Day? Well, Julian Zelizer, who teaches history and public affairs at Princeton, says to The Atlantic that, quote, we are not prepared for this at all. We talk about it, some worry about it, and we imagine what it would be, but few people have actual answers to what happens if the machinery of democracy is used to prevent a legitimate resolution to the election. Our democracy would be dead if Trump succeeds at this. If we fail, this is what happens. Republicans are making it clear. If they don't win by democracy, they will win despite democracy. They will subvert democracy. As David Frum said, if conservatives become convinced that they cannot win democratically, they will abandon conservatism and they will reject democracy. And by the way, it is not lost on me that this is part of why they want to rush to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That could end up being a factor. We are really up against it here. And it is just as appalling how Republican supporters, Republican voters, are so entrenched in their team sport mentality that they, by and large, are standing by as Donald Trump develops these strategies, as long as they reject the libs, right? That's the point. They will accept blatant corruption. They will stand aside as democratic values, not capital D, lowercase d, democratic values are dismantled, and they will let Trump do whatever the hell he wants. We are up against it, my friends. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
One of our sponsors today is Vincero Watches, and they're giving you 15% off everything in the store. If you're a guy looking for the perfect way to refresh your style, one of the best investments you can make is in a high-quality wristwatch. Vincero is an American company that has made it possible for everyday people to afford a premium watch. Almost everything they sell is within the range of about $200, but it'll look like you spent a lot more. All of their watches are made in small batches from top quality materials, and they just look great. I went on their site and picked out a watch from their Icon Automatic collection. The one I got is in mesh matte black, and I love it. It's simple, sleek, elegant, goes great with just about anything I'm wearing, and I've gotten a ton of compliments on it. You'll get 15% off everything in their store when you go to davidpakman.com/Vincero. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hey, consider yourself invited not just to get a membership at joinpakman.com, but also to join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Some interesting posts on the David Pakman Show subreddit this morning, including one post about, listen, the first debate is just days away. What should Biden's strategy be? And what will Trump's strategy be? Now, you can read this entire post on the subreddit, but my thoughts are the following. Joe Biden needs to be aggressive. Joe Biden, as you know, has been framed as demented, tired, confused, beta, for lack of a better term, by Donald Trump, while Donald Trump has framed himself as the strong, powerful leader. Joe Biden needs to be prepared, not just on the facts, which are the facts about Trump's failure on coronavirus, the fact about how our economy has suffered so much more than it had to and so much more than other economies, thanks to Trump's failings on coronavirus. So Biden needs to be prepared on the facts, but Biden needs a strategy where he will be aggressive. And Donald Trump, he did things with Hillary Clinton, ominously standing behind her and pointing to her and saying, you'd be locked up if I was president, all of this stuff. Trump is likely to go for that again. And Joe Biden needs to be prepared. And I believe Joe Biden needs to come out swinging. There is very little downside to it. And he needs to protect himself from what Trump's likely strategy would be. Trump's likely strategy is going to be to try the same stuff that he tried on Hillary, on Biden, and it will be up to Biden whether it will work or whether it will not work. Trump is likely to come in with critiques, poorly worded and inarticulate, but critiques of the Obama administration. Biden needs to be prepared to immediately rebut that and to say, this is a referendum on these last 4 years. Do people want you again for another 4 years? And of course, he needs to be prepared to actually have the factual fight as well. And Joe Biden needs to be prepared for the low blows that Donald Trump is likely to come in with. That includes Hunter Biden stuff. This includes H1N1 seems to be a popular topic for Donald Trump. This includes Biden and China. And Biden needs to have a strategy for how to deal with that. So we'll be covering it live. I do think it will be very, very interesting. Another post from the subreddit, Lime Guy, asking, do any of you ever get angry watching the Trump movement? I feel like this election is not good for mental health. I agree. I actually agree. I am looking forward to hopefully the removal of Trump and things being boring for a while. It won't be good for the show financially, but I don't care about that. It'll be better for the country and it'll be good for our mental health. And I completely agree. And then lastly, user Morton posts to the subreddit, it will likely take 2 to 3 elections to undo some of the damage. And I agree. And Morton points out that, our hopes should not be too high in terms of what a Biden first term would do. I think we need to think about it more systemically. It's not just a Biden first term. It's Biden winning. Democrats may be taking the Senate now, maybe in 2022, and it's going to be a cumulative effect. There are things that Joe Biden can relatively quickly undo by executive order. There is damage, like including damage to the climate, damage to international alliances, which have been ruined under Donald Trump. That will take some time. And then remember, on the tail end of it, we're still going to have 60 million Trumpists living in the United States. What do we do about that? I still don't have the answer. Join the discussion, as more than 23,000 of you already have, at davidpakman.com/Reddit. People in the audience have been sending me more and more of these video clips of Michael Schur, our great friend Michael Schur, speaking to Trump supporters at recent rallies, as well as other reporters. And I want to play a few of them and talk a little bit about it. We did a story a few months ago about a group of uneducated white women who voted for Trump in 2016 being interviewed on CNN. And it was really bad. And I said at the time, this may not be politically correct. This may not be polite, but we have to come to terms with the reality that many voters have no clue. It's unfortunate. It's not nice to say in these terms, maybe, but the point is that they have just as much of a right to vote as anybody else. And many of them do vote. We have to understand that. We now have some interviews done over the last 5 or so days with various Trump supporters at different events. And it's really bad. It's just as bad. Before we get to the Michael Schur clips, let's start with one from CNN. CNN asking Trump rally-goers over the last few days, why aren't you wearing a mask? And it instantly turns into wildly debunked conspiracy theories.
Why are you guys not wearing masks?
I have one with me. It's my prerogative. Yeah.
But why not wear one to stay safe?
I have a hard time understanding people when they talk, so that's why I don't wear it.
But you can hear me right now?
I can hear you.
Sir, tell me, why are you not wearing your mask?
Because there's no COVID. It's a fake pandemic created to destroy the United States of America.
But the president said to Bob Woodward that there is a virus, the coronavirus, and that it is deadly.
That's his opinion. The truth is that the CDC said there's only less than 10,000 people die from COVID. The other 190,000 have 2.6 or 2.8 other mortalities.
COVID was created to destroy the U.S. That other conspiracy theory, by the way, about, the real number of deaths is 9,000. We've already debunked that. It's been widely debunked. But the important thing to glean is, even though it was debunked weeks ago, you still have these rally goers who probably do vote. I mean, I think that if you go to a rally, you're almost certainly voting. They still are repeating these conspiracy theories. And then it continues now taking sort of a more religious approach about not wearing a mask.
Does it worry you guys at all to be in this crowded space with all these...
I'm not afraid. The good Lord takes care of me. If I die, I die. We got to get this country moving. What are you going to do? Wear masks and stay inside for another year? Huh? Where'll that get us?
So that's really bad. Then we have these great clips from our friend Michael Schur doing these interviews for TYT. And first, folks going right into socialism.
He says he's not a socialist, but all of his ideas sound like socialist ideas, and everybody around him are like socialists, and they all support that. And I think that as soon as he's in office, he will start pushing socialism if he was in office.
They're the devil. They got a lot of Satan in them. They're out for their own good. They have no interest in the United States of America.
And the they there, who's the they?
The Democrats, Biden, Pelosi, all of them. They just got a lot of evil in them. They are not in the best interest of the United States of America.
I support Trump because he's not a socialist. I'm a foreigner in America. I lived in 2 socialist countries, and I want nothing to do with socialism.
Do you see Joe Biden as socialist?
The people that are handling him are socialists, yes.
There are no socialist ideas from Joe Biden. Now, I've said before, I get criticized for being a socialist, even though I'm not, and for not being a socialist by people who want me to be a socialist. Many on the left wish Joe Biden were a socialist. He's not. There's nothing socialistic about Joe Biden's policies. Here are supporters confronted by Michael Schur with Donald Trump's comments about soldiers who died in combat being losers and suckers. We suspected that many of them would simply say Trump didn't really say it, and that's exactly what many of them said.
Ridiculous, the media. All the lies they put out there are ridiculous. No president's going to make a comment like that. Definitely Donald Trump, our president, is not going to make a comment like that. Look what he's done with the veterans. He's done more for their medical care than any other president probably in the history of the country. So absolutely false. And the media's going to come out with something false every day. They continue to lie and lie and lie. And a lot of people are aware of that.
If John Kelly did say that happened, what would you think of that?
I would disregard it because I know there's over 25 people that said it didn't occur.
Doesn't fit with your worldview? Doesn't match your pre-existing beliefs? Well, then just say it didn't happen. Here's another one.
It's all a lie. He loves the veterans. And I'd rather have him 10 times than I had Biden. Biden won't do nothing but sell our country to China and anybody else he can get $1 from. That's all he's ever done since he's been in office.
As a military veteran, some of the stuff that's come out about what the president's allegedly said about, Americans in cemeteries and whatnot, and what he said about John McCain, a naval man, has that given you pause at all?
It has not. He has said some things that, I say things off of the spur of the moment that I go back and say, why did I say that for,
That last guy, interestingly, taking the approach, not of denying that Trump said it, but denying that he meant it. And then this last one is really special. Michael Schur from TYT really doing a great job on these. Trump supporters asked, what will you do if Donald Trump loses?
Will you accept the result if Joe Biden wins?
No.
Under any circumstance?
No.
Why is that?
Because it's lies and deceit and corruption.
So this is one strategy. And again, this is the importance of paying attention to the stories Trump tells. They're ridiculous stories, but they work. They stick to people. If Biden wins, it would be fake. Preemptively saying it'll be fake if Biden wins. Take a look at this next one.
I'll be down on my knees praying a lot harder.
Praying for Joe Biden's success, or praying for 4 years from now replacing Joe Biden?
Praying for God to help us.
President Biden, that can't happen. I can't even think about that because he does not like America. He's a racist. Now, that's a racist. If you want to look at someone who despises the black man, the black woman, he looks out for himself. He's a crook. His son is a crook. He's a criminal.
What happens if Donald Trump loses? Do you have a fear for the country if Donald Trump? You're nodding your head. I'll go. Okay, you can. Well, I'll ask both of you.
We actually have plans to move to Panama because it's a city, or it's a country that allows Americans to move there and to actually own firearms there. I mean, if they trust us enough to own firearms as, people with legal right to be in their country, it seems like a place that's not planning to do something terrible to their people.
But if he wins, it means the Democratic machine has won in some of the illegal tactics that, the voter fraud. I think that if he loses, they come after all of us supporters.
Yeah, Biden is actually the racist. Now, I know the reaction from many of us when we watch this stuff, when we hear these clips, is disgust. How are these our fellow Americans? How is it possible to have such uneducated, ignorant people in the United States? This is the result of our education system. This is the result of religious indoctrination. This is the result of decades of anti-intellectualism going back to, in a sense, anti-intellectualism has been around for hundreds of years, but certainly prominently in the Republican Party to Reagan. And, this imaginary welfare queen with 12 kids and a Cadillac and whatever the story was. Everything we've been talking about, this is the outcome that we are seeing. We are seeing it front and center, and it is very ugly. Check out one other one here.
I've actually considered leaving the country, moving to South America or something like that, if something like that happens. I've had neighbors that moved when Hillary was running against President Trump because he was convinced Hillary was going to win. He sold everything and moved to Panama. So I'm thinking, my ancestors did that back in the 1900s when they left Germany. So
I would hurt for my grandchildren.
Why South America, I wonder? Most of those governments in South America are left-wing governments by most standards. Now, if the guy likes authoritarians, I guess he could look at moving to Venezuela, but I don't think that's the idea of a better place for most Trump voters. But really, really stunning stuff. And we have to resist. There's this thing that will often happen on the left where we start kind of moralizing and talking about, these poor, stupid people and blah, 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 blah. They vote. And I think that we really need to see them. It's much more productive to see these folks as victims rather than perpetrators. They are victims of an education system that has failed. They are victims of, in some cases, religious indoctrination. They are victims of a lack of media literacy and a corporate media that thrives on salaciousness and so on and so forth. It's far more productive to do that than to look down at them from some moral high ground, which I think is both unjustified in many ways and completely counterproductive. Let me know your interpretation if you disagree with mine, and we'll have more of these clips on the show Instagram page at David Pakman Show on Instagram.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Will Sommer back to the program. Will is a tech reporter for the Daily Beast, also author of the Wright Richter newsletter on conservative media. A great person to follow on Twitter, I would also say, Will. Thanks for being back on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we've been following and talking about QAnon. We've talked with Media Matters' Alex Kaplan about QAnon members who have a real shot at being elected to Congress. So we talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, Colorado's Lauren Boebert. There are others as well. Let's first start with your assessment of the strength of this as an actual political movement.
I think QAnon is really getting a foothold within the GOP. We saw a poll this week that said roughly 40% of Republican respondents said that QAnon is a good thing. We've seen other polls suggesting maybe around 7% of people believe in it. So, it's not a majority by any means, but given how crazy their beliefs are, it's pretty concerning.
I read an interesting article by Greg Stanton, and we may be speaking to him at some point in the future, where he points out that QAnon ideology, to the extent that we can call it an ideology, is really like rebranded anti-Semitic tropes, that there's a lot of overlap with ideas from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and just a lot of the standard tropes of white nationalism and anti-Semitism that we've seen. Do you agree? And what portion is made up of that?
Yeah, sure. So QAnon, it's sort of like Scientology, where when people first get into it, they don't tell you kind of the wildest stuff. So, people get in and they'll say, don't you think Jeffrey Epstein was bad? Obviously people do. And then they kind of get you in there. And then when you're really into it, they say, well, really, QAnon is about people in banking and Hollywood, which obviously kind of code, drinking children's blood. So, you get right into blood libel right there. So, QAnon really is about, alleging all these powerful Jewish people are controlling the world. So, pretty anti-Semitic on its face.
There has been, in the last 48 hours, it seems far less likely that this will happen, but Donald Trump had been banking for political reasons on a vaccine announcement probably sometime in the next 6 weeks, which was likely to be an emergency use authorization, not a full approval from the FDA. The idea being that he could sort of attach himself to it and take credit for it. At the same time, QAnon seems to be relatively anti-vax. Am I wrong about that? So I'm seeing a very strange situation where Trump has previously tweeted about vaccines and autism. He had to kind of be talked off a ledge by Ben Carson during debates during the 2016 Republican primary. Now he's sort of all in on a vaccine, and yet this group seems very anti-vax.
Yeah, it's an interesting contradiction. As you said, Trump has kind of promoted anti-vaccine stuff in the past. But QAnon people often are very anti-vaccine. QAnon or anti-vaccine Facebook groups can be sort of a gateway into QAnon. And so we've seen, especially during the pandemic, we've seen interest in QAnon explode, along with a lot of skepticism about vaccines. And now you have Trump come out and say, well, the vaccine is really key to everything. And so, I mean, there definitely is a clash there. I mean, QAnon people have been saying, Bill Gates is going to put a microchip in the vaccine, all this stuff. Yeah. And suddenly Trump kind of has to turn these people around on it.
When you look at the media foothold to the extent that it exists for QAnon, are they linked in any way to any particular media outlets or publications? And in particular, I'm interested about whether there's a connection with OAN, this sort of like poor man's Fox News, kind of a blend between Fox News and a porn parody of sorts that Donald Trump has regularly called on during his press briefings.
Yeah, we see QAnon on its face is so ridiculous that even conservative media often wants to distance themselves from it. But what they end up doing is sort of taking ideas from QAnon and then sort of laundering them, stripping the QAnon name off of it and running with it. In the case of OAN, initially they were very anti-QAnon. But, I just had a story this week that they've been selling the use of QAnon emojis on their YouTube channel, including one referring to JFK Jr. coming back to life. So, really there, it seems like they've just decided to start profiting from it.
Right. On the David Pakman Show YouTube channel, if you subscribe, you get various colored show logos. And yet on OAN, you get QAnon stuff. That's certainly a different approach, I guess, to sort of monetizing content.
Yeah, well, maybe you should consider, you can have an emoji that's like send Hillary to Gitmo, all this stuff.
Right. I should look at that direction. So, okay, let's zoom out a little bit because you're following a lot of these different movements. What else is there right now that maybe our audience is not super familiar with? I mean, I think my audience is very familiar with, kind of your standard Trumpist talking points. We've looked at video from rallies. God is protecting me from the virus, or the virus itself is a hoax, sort of that wing, which is anything Trump says, they kind of repeat. We've got this QAnon wing. What other sort of subgroups are relevant in the underbelly right now?
Yeah, well, obviously we've got these sort of violent groups like the Proud Boys or these various kind of militias that I think are really starting to merge with QAnon in some ways. And really, this is, especially relevant as we head into the election. And these people are, there's all this kind of Civil War type rhetoric. And I think maybe one of the most interesting ones, again, with some ties to QAnon, is the growth of these conspiracy theories in like wellness and like yoga, like Instagram influencers.
I have not heard about this. This is interesting.
Yeah. So the typical QAnon believer is, white, older, kind of evangelical. But what we're seeing is there's this group called Save the Children, and this is kind of a QAnon front group. And they're having rallies with hundreds of people across the world in different cities. And they're sucking in a lot of moms on Facebook, Q a mom. And, these various Instagram yoga people who normally post about, eating yogurt and doing yoga and all this stuff. And then they'll just be like, but we got to get to the bottom of what's going on at Comet Ping Pong. So, it's disturbing stuff. And I think it suggests that these conspiracy theories can go beyond just the Trump base.
You mentioned the demographics of the typical QAnon supporter. One of the things we learned about 2016 was that the rate of the dissemination, a resharing of fake news was significantly skewed, not just to the right, but to older folks. And we could talk about sort of the reasons why. QAnon seems to have a significant younger contingent that maybe wasn't there with some of the predominant fake news stories of 2016. Is my impression correct?
That's absolutely right. And, one example, just to pick one, is that QAnon and TikTok, and Pizzagate are exploding on TikTok with young people. And they'll make these TikTok videos that say like, here's something about John Podesta, and like, yeah.
Now, is there anything that you can ascertain as to why this is getting more pickup with younger folks, whereas a lot of the 2016 stuff did not? Is it just that the technology now has changed in such a way, or the environment is different, or is it a concerted effort?
I think I think maybe the biggest part is that the world just seems like it's gotten a lot crazier. And you have obviously you have the very real Epstein stuff that I think pulls people into these conspiracy theories. You have the pandemic. And so I think there's just a lot more people who are kind of looking to get a grasp on what's going on. And unfortunately, they kind of fall down these rabbit holes.
In 2010, we saw the rise of the Tea Party movement, and a number of Tea Party candidates won. Tea Party caucus was created in the House of Representatives. And then eventually the Tea Party, the caucus still exists, but some of it kind of went away and some elements were integrated into the Republican Party. But the Tea Party was not associated with a presidential candidate in the way that QAnon is associated with Trump. So can you outline the likely paths where you have Trump and then some QAnon candidates? They all could win, or they all might lose, or some combinations of the two. What's the sort of path forward look like depending on what happens in November?
Sure. I mean, here's what we're looking at in terms of how many QAnon people are going to be in Congress next year.
Right.
So we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia, who you mentioned. She's in a really Republican district. She's a Republican, so she's almost certain to win. Trump's endorsed her. I think it's very interesting that the White House has been very real. They just will not criticize QAnon, which I think is another sign of QAnon's power. And in fact, when a Republican lawmaker came out and did criticize QAnon, the Trump campaign attacked him. So, that's kind of the line is don't talk about QAnon, and certainly not in a negative way. We've got Lauren Boebert in Colorado, House candidate, kind of a battleground district. She says, well, I don't believe in QAnon anymore. Oh, well, great. She said, I support QAnon. I hope it's real. And now she's kind of backed away. But so she's maybe got a toss-up chance. In I believe Oregon and Delaware, there are Republican Senate nominees who have believed in QAnon. They're probably not going to win. But still, out of 35 Senate races, we've got two with QAnon believers. So, I think the GOP is really failing to stand up to this. And so I think we can expect to see more of it.
To what degree should the Democratic Party engage with this, criticize it, there's often a discussion about platforming versus ignoring versus responsible platforming, as some call it. Do you have a sense of whether this has risen to a point at which we need to hear more from the left about it?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, as you say, on one hand, you don't want maybe Joe Biden going out every day and saying, here's what QAnon is, because you're exposing a certain amount of people to it. On the other hand, I think certainly when it comes to the media, the cow has left the barn, I think, in terms of not telling people about QAnon or hoping it doesn't get bigger. We're talking about QAnon murders, QAnon terrorism, QAnon kidnapping. And, at some point, I do think, we have to trust voters and the audience to know what's going on, even if it's very crazy.
If you look around the country and you see some of the different groups that, my take, well, maybe let's actually start there to see if we're on the same page on this piece. My take generally has been that Donald Trump has not really generated new racism or xenophobia or radicalism, but has made that which already existed sort of more comfortable being public about it. Question one is, do you agree with that assessment, or has Trump's presidency actually created more of that?
Well, certainly I think, I wouldn't want to suggest that Trump is, kind of a unique character in terms of, racism. On the other hand, I think in terms of conspiracy theories, I think having a guy in the White House who promotes this stuff obviously was a big birther and legitimizes it. I do think that kind of brings the GOP. It basically provides an opening, I think, for these conspiracy theories to take over the GOP and get more people from within.
So I guess the question is, if Trump loses, are we to expect that a lot of these groups whose views are now much more in the open, are they going to go back underground in some sense? It doesn't eliminate the views. It doesn't de-radicalize, but it would be, again, an environment where they are less comfortable being public about their views, or is the cat sort of out of the bag at this point?
It's hard to really predict what happens, but I do think that potentially if Trump loses, some people are anticipating, it's like the spell lifts, the QAnon people don't believe in it anymore. I think instead what's going to happen is that these people who have been so revved up and basically convince that Democrats are like, eating children and they're Satanists and all this, and that Trump's going to solve it. And then when he loses, they're going to say, well, the deep state did it. Now we have to take matters into our own hands. So, I feel like I could see really QAnon sort of being integrated more into the GOP, potentially in a violent way.
One other thing specifically on the QAnon beliefs I wanted to ask about. A lot of as you say, sometimes the gateway to QAnon is Jeffrey Epstein related. The more we know about Epstein, the more sort of touch points there are with Donald Trump. And there are even allegations that were made in a lawsuit, which have the lawsuit has since been pulled. But they were allegations about joint sexual assault involving Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Is there no concern in your mind or discussion among QAnon that the more they push this, that it could actually implicate Donald Trump?
No, I mean, they have so much like cognitive dissonance and rationalization when it comes to Trump. I mean, obviously, Trump, appointed the prosecutor who gave Epstein a sweetheart deal to the cabinet. Obviously, there's videos of Trump and Epstein hanging out and kind of appraising women together.
Yeah.
And so instead, what they say is that, Trump was infiltrating Epstein's circle and that by appointing this prosecutor to the cabinet, he was kind of drawing more attention to this dirty deal and all this kind of stuff.
That's like a textbook example of the unfalsifiable argument. It's, there's an invisible tiger in this room. Oh, all right. Well, let's lay down some baby powder. So as the invisible tiger walks around, it'll disturb the baby powder. Well, no, it's also a weightless invisible tiger. Like you cannot possibly disabuse someone of those beliefs. And maybe that's by design, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the beauty of the QAnon clues, or the genius of it, is that even when they make predictions, people will say, the prediction doesn't come true. They'll say, well, maybe we just misread the predictions. We were wrong. Or that maybe Q was trying to throw off the deep state, with some bad info. And so really, this makes it really hard to disabuse people of these notions. And, I hear all the time from people who have lost family members or loved ones to QAnon. And, it's really hard to get people out of it.
We've been speaking with Will Sommer, tech reporter for The Daily Beast, also author of the Wright Richter newsletter on conservative media. Will, always great speaking with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today is not a day like any other, and I'm not doing a Passover Seder. I know many of my friends will recognize that line from Passover. No, today is not a day like any other for different reasons. Yesterday, yes, Donald Trump spoke publicly again. Yes, we are going to discuss it. Yes, I am going to play some clips. But Donald Trump has now gone over a line where he is just 5.5 weeks away from the election, refusing to say that there will be a peaceful transition of power should he lose. He will not commit to a peaceful transition. Now, when you combine this with our earlier story from the top of the show about Donald Trump's contingency plan for how to retain power even if he loses, you have to, at this point, start paying attention. This was a press briefing. I guess it was sort of under the umbrella of a coronavirus press briefing, although on coronavirus, Trump says the same thing every time, which is we're doing great. Everything's fine on the virus. And then the questions started from the press corps, and Donald Trump was asked, will you commit to a peaceful transfer of power? And Donald Trump refuses to commit to it, and he's a wannabe dictator, and we should all be very, very scared.
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Now, the guy asking the questions saying, hey, but people are rioting, so will you commit to a peaceful transition? It's actually a non sequitur. And you know, we have protests that are mostly peaceful. And now there is unrest because of what's going on with Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, which we already talked about. I don't really love the framing of, will you commit to a peaceful transfer of power because there are riots? It's like, well, hold on. Will you commit to a peaceful transfer of power is really the full question. You don't need anything else with it. But this is the red alert, the reaction from Donald Trump. We don't have to speculate that Donald Trump might not leave or will try not to leave, to be clear, because he's saying it in broad daylight. I have to see the results first before I commit to a peaceful transfer of power, even if I lose. When Trump says the way it will be peaceful is if we don't have the ballots, he's referring to vote absentee by mail, which Trump thinks would lead to him winning. He is essentially saying, if the results are that I won, we will have a peaceful transition, in that there will be no transition, because if the election is fair, I will win. This is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to say. All standard bullet points apply. Everybody has to vote. This is not a rehearsal. This is happening. He's doing it. It's outrageous. And it didn't get any less crazy. Just a couple of other clips. Donald Trump was told during the briefing that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will not be supporting him. And Trump just insults Meghan Markle.
Mr. President, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle chimed in on the U.S. election and essentially encouraged people to vote for Joe Biden. I want to get your reaction to that.
I'm not a fan of hers. And I would say this, and she probably has heard that, but I wish a lot of luck to Harry, because he's going to need it.
This is a president speaking this way. And then Trump brings up, and we'll discuss this later, that mixing the flu with the China virus, as he calls it, will be interesting.
The flu, when it's mixed with COVID or China virus, is going to be very interesting to see what happens. But
interesting is certainly an interesting way to describe it. And then even the end of this press briefing is wild. Trump abruptly says, as the questions start coming in about Breonna Taylor, Trump says he has to go take an emergency phone call and walks away. And when reporter John Roberts asks him, who's the phone call with? Trump just says it's very important.
Leave for an emergency phone call. I'm going to let Scott and Larry finish that. Larry's going to talk about the economy. So I'll be back. I will see you tomorrow.
Mr. President, just one more question on Breonna Taylor. We're at a time right now where Americans feel like we are on this carousel.
I have a big
Mr.
call.
President, just one more question, if I can, on Breonna Taylor.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of the flavor, the tone. But the big thing here is Donald Trump is refusing to say he will leave peacefully if he loses. The man has come to the end of the line, and he knows Biden could win. Biden could win, and he is going to pull out all the stops and see if he can get away with it. And why wouldn't he? He's gotten away with so much so far. Why wouldn't he try it? And the ironic thing is, we talk about projection constantly. If Biden wins, Trump will call that a coup. That's what Trump will say is a coup. They will always accuse you of what they are actually doing. Now, the truth here is Donald Trump has always had this perspective. What I mean is Trump still hasn't accepted the results of 2016 when he won. Trump still does not accept that he really lost to Hillary by millions of votes. He continues to say, well, I won electorally hugely. And even on the popular vote, it was rigged. Buses from Massachusetts to New Hampshire. It's like, well, hold on. What are you talking about? How would that even affect the popular vote? First of all, if people are voting in the wrong state. But in any case, he still has not accepted the results of an election he won. Democracy is really at risk here, and certainly Donald Trump will do everything he can not to accept the results of an election if he loses. Okay, now one other thing. I want to separate this clip out from yesterday's press briefing because it really boggles the mind how ignorant and clueless Donald Trump still is on the basics of coronavirus. During yesterday's press briefing, Donald Trump asked, is there a way to separate the flu and coronavirus? Can we distinguish if someone has the flu from someone who has coronavirus? It's almost like Trump hasn't spent the last 6 months talking about testing, coronavirus tests, which tell you whether you have coronavirus or not. This is inconceivable that this is a question we're still getting from Trump in September.
You see what's happening in Europe, however, they have a very big spike. Countries that we thought were doing well aren't doing well. They had some very big spikes, a very big surge. Months ago, we increased our nation's procurement of the flu vaccine by 66%, and we ask Americans to go get their annual flu shot as early as possible. It's possible, I would imagine, Scott, that the flu can get mixed up with the virus and people can think it's the virus when actually it's another flu season coming on. And I don't know. I hope they can keep them separate. Can they keep them separate?
We hope so.
I doubt they will. It's going to be a very interesting time. But we have a flu season coming up. We've had some flu seasons which are really massive over the years.
Scott, do we have a way of separating a flu case and a coronavirus case? And even more bizarre, I mean, it's a gong show. Scott Atlas bizarrely says, I hope we do. And Donald Trump says, I don't think we do. He spent the last 6 to 7 months talking about coronavirus testing, how many tests, how fast are the tests. He says it all the time. When you test, you find cases. That's how you separate a coronavirus case from something else. We have a test for the flu, which tells us if someone has the flu. We have a test for coronavirus, which tells us if someone has coronavirus. How does the president of the United States not know that at this point? It's mind-blowing, inconceivable ignorance. And maybe more important, well, not more importantly, but equally interesting is that this is probably a peek behind the curtain of how people deal with Trump behind the scenes. The normal response, if someone says, hey, can we tell the difference between coronavirus and the flu? A normal response would be absolutely. We have tests for the flu and we have tests for coronavirus. No problem. This is how it works. Scott Atlas instead says, I hope that we can. What? And my sense is that this is how it works behind the scenes frequently. We wonder, Trump's been mispronouncing convalescent plasma as convalescent plasma for months. How has no one just said, oh, you know, Sir, as Trump likes to say, sir, it's plasma. Apparently, Trump loses his mind when people do that. We wonder, why does Trump keep saying the 1917 flu? It's the 1918 flu. Why has no one gone up to him and said, it's 1918, not 1917? Well, Scott Atlas's response tells us why. People are either afraid of Trump or they've decided they can't correct him or it's pointless to correct him or whatever. But that is probably the explanation that you saw there. And it's scary because there is no error correcting mechanism in the same way that Scott Atlas doesn't just say, yes, of course, we have flu tests and coronavirus tests. We have to believe that behind the scenes, you see a similar lack of pushback on foreign policy, on economic policy, on everything. Horrifying and frightening. Here's an interesting question that came in via voicemail. Yesterday, I interviewed Jesse Lee Peterson on the program, and a lot of people had some version of this question. Take a listen to it.
Hey, David, Joel in Florida. I watched your interview with Jesse Lee Peterson. I've watched the clips where he interviewed you in the past. I've watched some of the clips of his show. I've looked online. My question is this guy for real? Is this sort of like a Phil Hendry where he's playing a character or a comedy routine, or is this for real? I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, so a lot of people have asked me this. I do not believe Jesse Lee Peterson is playing a character. And the reason I don't believe that is when I went to his studio in Los Angeles, he was exactly the same off air. Now, maybe he's playing, and I'm talking like he's talking about Trump stuff and saying all the same things. Maybe it's such a commitment to the character that he even continues off air. But I don't think Jesse Lee Peterson is playing a character, which makes it all the more scary. We've got a great bonus show for you today. 1 in 5 recent coronavirus cases are people in their 20s. People in their 20s. We will talk about the new Republican focus on Joe Biden's son, Hunter. And we will also talk about what Michael Bloomberg did to enable 32,000 additional Floridians to vote in November. Very interesting and important stories on the bonus show. Get instant access, instant, by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Just a reminder, today's program was made possible by Vincero Watches, the American watchmaker building super quality wristwatches, but making them affordable for everyday people. And they're giving you 15% off when you go to davidpakman.com/Vincero. Today's show also sponsored by Blinkist. Blinkist is the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in 15 minutes. And you can try Blinkist for free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put that link down below underneath the video.